all is known. Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the soul still awaits you. Go on alone. Go on alone. Go on alone.
This week's reading from Rays of the One Light, which are parallel commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, is entitled Abiding in God. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Yogananda often emphasized, more often to his disciples than to the general public, but also to everyone generally, for it was a universal teaching, the importance of attunement. For divine understanding cannot be created, it must be perceived. To the disciples, Yogananda often spoke of the importance of attunement with the Guru. To others, he urged the importance of at least attuning oneself to higher consciousness. Can an eagle rise without support from the sustaining air? Jesus Christ said in the Gospel of St. John, I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit, for without me ye can do nothing. If a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch, and is withered, and men gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. If ye abide in me, and my words abide in you, ye shall ask what ye will, and it shall be done unto you. Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit, so shall ye be my disciples. How can we abide in him? Jesus says, if my words abide in you. By words, he meant not only his spoken words, but his vibration, his consciousness, of which the words are only an expression. We must abide by the teachings, but we must also absorb those teachings into ourselves, that they become our own experience. For disciples of this path, the more in their hearts they live consciously in the presence of the Masters, the more they will find the divine presence living within them. For all truth seekers, whether disciples or not, the more they live sustained inwardly by the awareness of God's presence, the higher they will find themselves soaring in wisdom and joy. For the Bhagavad Gita says in the 10th chapter, I am the source of everything. From me all creation emerges. Blessed with this realization, the wise, awe-stricken, adore me. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. Could you put the fan just on one? I'd also like to read from Whispers from Eternity. This is, Make me thy butterfly of eternity. I have burnt my past, destroying every seed of evil destiny. I have stridden bravely through the strewn ashes of my past and future fears. I am the eternal now, having torn to shreds my enclosing cocoon of ignorance with the sharp knife of free will. Now I am thy soaring butterfly of eternity, flitting freely through immeasurable skies of time. The beauty of my wings I spread out through nature everywhere to entertain all beings. My wings are sprinkled with suns and stardust. Lo, I am beautiful. May every silken thread that shrouded my past folly be severed forever. See, they trail now behind me, only adding to my beauty as I wing my way to my own self in thee. It's beautiful how Master uses the image of a butterfly bringing beauty to the world and to everyone. And Dharmini and I the other day were out somewhere having lunch, and there was a big window next to us, and a butterfly came and landed right on the outside of the window on the sill and just sat there for, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes. And sometimes it opened its wings and sometimes it closed them, but it was just there being beautiful. And it's important to remember that beauty is an expression of God. Sometimes in our efforts to prove the sincerity of our austerity, we will just remove all, of these glittering tinsel, lest we be drawn out into the senses. As one yogi said to Swamiji, this yogi was over 120 years old, so obviously something was working for him. And he said to Swamiji, however, he said, "You should not enjoy anything." And Swamiji said, "Not even a beautiful sunset?" "No, nothing." And Swamiji, wasn't going to argue with him, but he thought that wasn't Master's way, to be so dry. Master was so comfortable in his centeredness in God that he could enjoy God's manifestation, but with God's joy in it. I mean, just imagine God making a butterfly, just like he made a flower and thought, well, the flower is nice, but what if, that's only for the people who happen to walk past it. I'd like the flower to get up and walk around and visit people, but that might frighten them. So let's make the flower fly. And so he made a butterfly. And so it, flits and floats and brings beauty to everybody. In fact, I believe, at least I heard Swamiji say once that the original word for butterfly was flutterby, which of course makes much more sense, it flutters by. But then, he said the English made a joke that it was a butterfly instead of a flutterby, a butterfly, and so then the name stuck. I mean, obviously, the butterfly has nothing to do with ghee or butter or anything. It doesn't feed on those. Butterflies, by the way, in case you didn't know, their taste buds are in their feet. And so whenever they land on something sweet, they immediately go and taste it that way. So all of that to say that we began this morning with these parallel commentaries on the Bible and the Gita, seeing the underlying truth expressed in each. And it is, it's really something that comes from the Masters. Remember, this work was initiated by Babaji and Jesus Christ, as we repeat in the Festival of Light. But we are reading the Holy Science right now in our Wednesday class series. And it is a book, as most of you know, from Autobiography of a Yogi, that Babaji, when he met Sri Yukteswar for the first time at a Kumbh Mela, he said, "Please, Swamiji, write this book based on the teachings of Christ and also the teachings of India, not just the Gita, but the teachings of India generally. Show by parallel commentary and explanation the unity of these two spiritual paths." And why did he say that at that time? One of the reasons given in the autobiography is lest man's sectarian differences separate them forever, meaning separate the East and the West particularly. And so in a direct answer to that, Sri Yukteswar wrote this commentary. And the rest of the story. Babaji appeared under the banyan tree at Serampore and then said, because Sri Yukteswar said thank you. I mean, he's thanked Sri Yukteswarji for writing the book. And some of us have been to that banyan tree. And so then you have Yoganandaji. Every Sunday service that he gave, he would quote the Bible and he would quote the Gita. He would give a commentary on the Bible and relating it to the Gita and the teachings of India. He would read from Whispers from Eternity. Swamiji, when he did his services originally, before we had this book, Rays of the One Light, would give a commentary on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita and read from Rays of the One Light. And then he and read from Whispers from Eternity, Master's Book of Prayer Poems. And now we read from Rays of the One Light and do Whispers from Eternity. Why? Well, because Swamiji did. And why did he? Because Master did. And why did Master do it? Master was asked once, you call your church the church of all religions, but you focus primarily on the teachings of Jesus Christ and Krishna. Why is that? And Master could have said anything. He could have said, these are the teachings of Sanatana Dharma expressed through Christ, expressed through Krishna. They're the same teaching. These are both avatars coming from the same God. He could have even have said, more closely the connection between Christ and Babaji, and Christ and Krishna, as he said, acting always together. All these things he could have said. But he just said, in answer to that question, that was the will of Babaji. It's a very wonderful answer. And it's a not convenient answer too. Why were you late, for the satsang? It was the will of Babaji. No, I'm kidding. We have to be careful how we use that one. Because you don't want to have Babaji show up and say, But on the other hand, Master just simply said, that was the will of Babaji. How do we know? Master said it, so we know. But how do we know independently of that statement? Because Babaji asked Sri Yukteswarji, write this book on the Bible and the teachings of India. And so what we do in these morning services is directly from Babaji's request to Sri Yukteswar. And remember, even that was originated by Christ appearing to Babaji in the Himalayas and saying, let us together send someone to bring the great truths of these two religions back into the forefront of everyone's understanding. Part of the reason why now is because we're entering into this Dwapara Yuga, have entered, and it's a new age. And so mankind in general is better able to understand these things. And part of the reason for that is because we are understanding that matter is only a manifestation of energy. Without the concept of energy, you can't say so much. You can't say, feel the energy. It's like, what are you talking about? Imagine, without electricity, how could we even really give an image of what energy is? You see, electricity we somehow understand. Who has seen electricity? Raise your hand. If you have, I'm sorry for you, because it's like, when lightning struck, the tree outside my house or something. That actually happened to me once. Lightning struck the tree outside our house. Everything went red for a moment. We were just having lunch. Suddenly, everything was red. And there was a deafening noise. And we thought, wow. Everybody here? Everybody accounted for? No casualties? There were a few casualties. The printer, the fax machine, the computer, the TV, almost all the electronics got fried. This was before people generally knew, or at least we generally knew, about surge protectors. And so the lightning killed everything, even the modem. So that gives you a sense of how long ago it was. For those of you who don't know, a modem is how we used to connect to the internet. So we haven't seen electricity, but we know that somehow it powers everything, and that it's a universal power. You can plug in a fan and it'll make the fan spin. You can plug in a light and it will give light. You can plug in a heater. Well, you would never plug in a heater in Chennai, but imagine that it was cold enough that you'd have to plug in a heater. You'd get heat. And so this same electricity manifests in different ways. And so it's easy for us to understand the concept of the divine energy manifesting through different life forms, that the same underlying power is behind everything. It's easy to make that connection, at least mentally. But then we come to today's topic, which is abiding in God, living in God. Because it's not enough to be able to just study and understand these things intellectually. Or rather, I should say, we reach a point when it is no longer enough. I spoke to a man recently who is now moving through our classes here. And he said, I'm thinking about taking discipleship. And I've been studying Vedanta for 20 years under the guidance of various teachers. And it doesn't feel to me that taking discipleship to Yoganandaji would somehow conflict with my study of Vedanta. And of course, I said, yes, you're right, it doesn't conflict. And he said, and I find great satisfaction from studying this Vedanta and so on. And yet, he said, I haven't found the peace through this study that I have found through meditating. And that's why I think he keeps coming. Because after 20 years of study, it's fantastic to be able to say Bastrika Upanishad, no, not Bastrika, Bastrika, and all the things you can say in Sanskrit, forwards and backwards and upside down. And again, I'm not knocking it. My God, it's how God has spoken to us in so many ways. But if it doesn't quench the thirst of your heart, then something needs to be added to that. Again, it's not an either or. But the point of yoga, of course, is to get you to God. Vedanta tells you what it will be like when you get to God. And Sankhya reminds you of your need to get to God if that hasn't yet occurred to you. But yoga is the bridge that takes you from A to B. And it's a big A and it's a bigger B. It takes you from here to infinity. It gets you to that divine understanding within yourself. But along the way, peace enters your heart. You feel that joy, you feel that love, and no one needs to explain it. And no one needs to say, smriti, samadhi, santosha. No, you just feel that joy. And that's enough to keep you going. And so this is the point of what it means to live in God. It doesn't mean only or even to just follow the rules. These are the rules of a divine soul, and these are the rules of what God has laid out, and so these are the rules I will follow, and then I will be able to say, when God comes with his little clipboard, I will raise my hand and say, I have followed the rules, I don't drink coffee, so I'm ready to enter heaven. You see, there's a lot more to it than that. Because why? Why did I pick the trivial example of drinking coffee? Of course, if you can manage to not drink coffee, excellent, good. There's nothing holy, really, or unholy about it in itself. But to artificially stimulate oneself, certainly. Again, if you can avoid it. I myself, never mind. No, I do enjoy coffee. But it's just that we don't want to excessively excite ourselves or depend on something else to keep our energy going. For that we have energization. Certainly, we need energy, no question about that. But the point is, when we don't drink coffee, you need to notice it sometimes in people. They'll say, someone say, what, coffee venoma? Just like, venta. I shall not partake along with the other sinners here. And so I would say that if that thought ever enters your mind, have a coffee. Because it's much worse for the heart to be constricted by judgment, by insensitivity to others' realities, than it is to be pure in thyself. When Swamiji first came on the path, there was a brother disciple who said, you can gain spiritual progress very quickly if you go on a fast of grape juice. Because then the body eliminates everything and there's nothing in the system to slow the brain down, and you can be very pure in your consciousness. And Master heard that they were doing this grape cure, as it was called, and he said, it's better to have a pure heart than a pure stomach. And he also said, though, Master Swamiji said, should we stop? And Master said no. Just, he didn't want to dampen their enthusiasm, and he also didn't want to squash their willpower. But Swamiji said, after another day or so, I lost heart for the grape cure. And so, remember that in mind. Keep that in mind, where your consciousness is more important than any outward activity. Now, obviously, outward activities support the consciousness. But if you start to use that criterion, everything is easier. For example, I wanted to become a vegetarian when I came onto the spiritual path, but it took me a little while to adjust to it. And the reason I ultimately became a vegetarian, obviously it was instilled in my mind because of Master's book, Autobiography of a Yogi, and more than that, his example. And Swamiji saying, for Swamiji it was easy. He read the book, said, Master's a vegetarian, I'll be a vegetarian. Finished. But for me, it wasn't that there was some desires like, oh, I just can't live without meat. It was rather just habit and convenience. But I noticed that the more I meditated, and then for a while, for a week or two, I didn't have meat, just sort of accidentally. And then when I finally did again, it lowered my consciousness so much. And I'm not saying that meat eaters have low consciousness. What I'm saying is that when I ate it, it just brought my mind down. I found it much harder to meditate. I felt agitated and hot. And I thought, I'm working so hard to lift my consciousness. Why would I, take something that I can do without that is bringing it down? And so in this way, over time I gave up meat. It was rather a practical thing based on my own experience. And it was, I feel better when I don't do it, so I don't do it. And that's a great criterion in general. As Master said, to overcome any temptation, replace it with a greater divine temptation, so to speak. Find something that gives you more joy, and then you'll be able to easily let go of the other. As one man, one of Master's disciples, was a Kriyaban, and he also was an alcoholic. And his friends even made fun of him, saying, how can you even try to pretend to be holy and even take this initiation when you can't keep yourself off the bottle? And the man said, I can't help this habit, this bad habit that I have, but at least I can do something good also. And so he would literally have his Kriya beads in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other hand. And so he would do a few Kriyas and then have a little whiskey and then do a few more Kriyas and so on. And after a time, after doing enough Kriyas, he had that glass and he said, I don't need this compared to this. And he just put it aside and never drank again. And so when you hear Master saying, be a spiritual alcoholic, drunk with the joy of God, and use that as your criterion. Now, I will say that sometimes Divine Mother, in a rather playful mood for her, but miserable for us, she withdraws all joy from the spiritual path. All the same chants that we used to love, somehow the heart doesn't get touched anymore. All the beautiful readings and everything that we used to do, that used to be so thrilling, suddenly that we don't feel anything from. These dry periods come at different points in our spiritual lives. And that's one of the reasons why we also keep a strong meditative habit during the sort of wonderful periods, because then that sustains us through the dry periods. We keep a strong habit, or we can keep a strong habit of satsang, gathering together. Remember, satsang isn't just Sunday morning, but we have different ways of communicating throughout the week. You can call a friend, you can go to the website, you can watch a video of Swamiji, you can read from a book. Feel that's just a continuation of your spiritual family and your own connection individually with God. And so maintain that, because then when the tough times come, that will keep you going. That energy that you've put out is like a lot of deposits you've put in the spiritual bank, the sadhana bank, the satsang bank, the joy bank account. And then it may be time when there's no more deposits and you have to make a few withdrawals. Swamiji said in the spiritual path, in the new path, that his brother disciples, when they went through testing, he said, continued meditation, positive affirmation, and attunement with the Guru could have kept them traveling easily through these dry patches. He went through a difficult time of testing himself for 3 months, the way he describes it. And I remember once he retold the story of this test. It's called a divine test in the new path. I won't go into it now. But for 3 months he was miserable, just completely confused and struck with horrible doubts, doubting Master. Which, of course, if Maya is going to try to get you, it will try to separate you from the Guru. Because through the Guru is your salvation. Through the Guru is your way out. So if it can just attack that connection, then you're safe back in her clutches. On the other hand, you can think of it as God's test. God doesn't test us because He's wondering, let's see, Is Prasanna going to make it this time? We'll find out. Here's a little grenade. It's not that. He knows everything. God, not Prasanna. Sorry. But God tests us because He wants us to see that we actually are ready, that we have overcome this, that we are ready to let this go. It doesn't always mean we emerge victoriously by slashing all troubles. Sometimes it means we hung on to the Guru's feet, though beaten and bloodied, we hung on to the very end. And then the storm passed and we were still here. That's what it was for Swamiji. He found that it was through love, not intellectual convincing him of all of these doubts, not answers to those doubts, but love that got him through it. Because he said, no matter right or wrong, no matter clear or unclear, no matter what I'm thinking, I love my Guru. And so I will stick with him no matter what. Then, later, he found, when considering some of his doubts, that how ridiculous they were. Because he said, what a chump I've been because of how much greater Master's wisdom was that I was able to perceive. So keep that in mind when there's a niggling voice in the back of your mind. Just say, well, listen, who do I think is right? My ego or my Guru? And in fact, one person early on the spiritual path was frustrated, and because Swamiji had opposed a wish of hers, was saying, I just think he has a big ego. And you'll often hear that because it's not about Swamiji, but you hear people say, he has ego. Why? Because he's not doing what I say. And so someone appropriately said to her, who do you think has a bigger ego, Swamiji or you? And to this credit, this person went, okay, let me rethink this a little bit. And so the point, though, about all of this is that it was love that got Swamiji through. And so when we go through these periods of testing, remember, it is sometimes just a test also of God saying, will you stick with it even when it's not fun? Because let's face it, the reason why we get on the spiritual path is because it's fun. And it's good fun. It should be fun. Divine fun. In fact, it should always be fun. There could even be fun in testing. Because if you find that the car broke, and also this terrible other thing happened, and then this person you care about is going through a big problem, and there was a big financial loss, and there was a small fire down the street that messed up the internet connection and everything. You can say, well, I know Divine Mother must be testing me. Because there were, 4 bad things, maybe random, but 5 or 6, no way. It has to be from God. And so, if God is testing, that means she's noticing me. That means she's got me in her sights. That means she has her mind on me. Sometimes it just makes us say, okay, Divine Mother, I'm sorry, I got distracted. Remember, as Haridas Ji has said, Divine Mother, when she gets lonely, she grabs our finances because she knows she'll get our attention. And so, all of these things, as they come to you, just remember, okay, I can keep a sense of humor about the whole thing, if you can. Master said, read one funny story every day. It's good to laugh every day. And if you laugh, and your stomach hurts because you haven't laughed, then read 2 funny stories. You see? I notice that sometimes when things are difficult for me, I will laugh and I will say, what is that strange sound coming out of my mouth? I don't recognize it. Oh yes, I remember. That's laughter. I used to laugh. Okay, that's my cue that there's been a problem. Whereas if I looked in the mirror, I could have seen the problem right away. So, in these different ways, when you put in energy now, it carries you through the difficult times. When you live in God now, then you live in Him through these difficult times. As Lahiri Mahashaya said, invite God. If you don't invite God to be your summer guest, then He won't visit you in the winter of your life. And so, what does that mean? Enjoy things with God. When Kriya, for example, is going very well, enjoy it with God. Say, thank you, God, for this blessing. Thank you, God, for this gift of Kriya. Thank you for this experience. Thank you for this sweetness. As opposed to, I'm getting pretty good at Kriya. I remember when my meditations used to be dry and troubled. Samadhi is coming, Nalaki. You would try it, but then Nalaki comes and Samadhi doesn't. And so it's better to say God. And what does Samadhi even mean? It's the truth of living in God. It's oneness, absorption in God. So let's practice now. Let's practice each day, and with each joy. Say, this joy is a sign of my closeness to you. Say it that way as opposed to my closeness to God, to you. Think of God in the second person. Master said even liberated saints will sometimes manifest in human form on earth just to enjoy an I and thou relationship with God. In other words, a little sense of separation, so they can have that sort of connection again, father to child, or beloved to lover, and so on. These things, to have that connection. So if they're seeking it, they're also telling us how sweet it is that we have that connection. And remember, God is much more interested in you than, I don't want to say than you are in Him, but it's basically true. Master said, don't say, when will I have God? He said, you have Him already. He even gave an affirmation for self-realization, that part of it is that I know that the kingdom of God is within my possession, and all I have to do is increase my knowing of that. When we know in every fiber of our being, then we are truly living in Him. And keep in mind also that though this is a very personal path and a very personal journey, we gain much by associating with others for two reasons. One is that when we see a few friends and they're in joy, we kind of, everybody else is smiling, and I guess I don't want to be the only, sour face in the photograph, so I'll smile too. And then in smiling, we find out I actually feel like smiling, and so on. But also, so in other words, as Haridas Ji has mentioned, sometimes we heal each other with a glance. Someone just says, hi, how are you? Well, I'm fine. But more than that, then we pass that joy on to others. It was it's just something very sweet to see. Not only other Guru Bhais, but as we were talking about earlier, anybody else. They'll see that joy in you. And in a way, it's our responsibility to share it. Not our responsibility as, I am the source of all joy. I bless you with joy. It's not like that. But rather to say, again, go ahead, try it. What do we find? The joy goes away. But rather to say that I want it to flow through me. Remember, that joy is something that as you give it, your amount of it increases. It's not true of, money or blood or any other things you can give to people. But joy, when you give that joy, it increases. And remember, the intensity, for example, of such joy as it's radiating is strongest at the source. Now, of course, God is the source, but if you imagine it coming through you, it will be even stronger with you. Swamiji, we saw this all the time. He would come in one talk in Delhi, where his first public talk there in 2004 in Siri Fort. He had to go in a wheelchair, because he couldn't even walk from one side of the room to the other without having to sit down. He was so weak. And they brought him to the auditorium in a wheelchair. And then when it was time for the talk, he stood up, he walked to the podium, and then he stood for an hour and a half. And it was a tremendous talk. And this happened over and over with him, that physically Maya would try to stop him. And then he would, against all efforts, he would come, against all obstacles, with great effort he would come. As soon as he started to speak, all of his symptoms lifted. After the talk, he was standing, how are you, everything, just fine. But we saw it again and again and again. This happened. And so if you find when you're trying to do a good thing that there's some obstacles, say, well, I'm in good company. And with enough willpower, you will overcome. So let us take this message into our week, how we can live in God and how we can share His joy with everyone. God bless you.